This video is sponsored by the Magnet Baron. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This week, we have a huge number of results to talk about, including results from the Coventry GT. Now, this is a very interesting GT in that it is split into two separate events. A 2-day 5-round GT that ended with 4 undefeated players, as well as a 3-day that obviously will go to a single undefeated, and as such, comes with it more accolades and prestige. But we'll be talking about results from both of those today. And with that, we will hop directly over to a metagame breakdown. We're going to start with a bunch of results from that Coventry 2-day event. As I mentioned, it had 4 undefeated players, so we're going to see a lot of repeats here. And I will mention that we had a large number of relatively sizable GTs, 50-plus player GTs that came out with multiple undefeated players, which is why we're going to have many duplicate results on this list. This includes Tau Empire, who took down the Coventry 2-day with 2 undefeated players in the top 4. They also took down Imperium Talus X Iron Man, Duke Hammer GT1, and BZU 40k GT. I will mention that it looks like there is kind of a percolation of the metagame towards this top end that largely includes Aeldari and Tau Empire. This is the 3rd or 4th week that we've seen those 2 factions overperforming the rest of the metagame. However, I will mention that it really is fairly widespread, and we have been seeing good results from other factions as well. Aeldari, as I mentioned, also doing fairly well with an undefeated result at Coventry 2-day, an undefeated result at the Battle Brothers GT, and a win at Volos Grailfest. World Eaters took down the Mance GT2, Duke Hammer GT1, and BZU 40k GT. Adepta Sororitas did win the prestigious Coventry 3-day with a 6-0 result. That was a previous T5S2 season champion who won that one, so I'm excited to talk about their list. It's a cool one. They also took down the SA40k Commissar Cup GT and the Wicked City Wargaming GT. Tyranids won the Battle Brothers GT, one of 2 undefeated players there, as well as the Paragon City Game Store Championships. And Leagues of Votann had undefeated results both at Orktoberfest 2025 and GaleCon. Now from there, we had huge results from Space Marines, with a massive variety of chapters doing well. This includes Ultramarines and Raven Guard, both at Rumble on the Rivers. Ultramarines took down that event, Raven Guard, with an undefeated record, but did not place first due to tiebreakers. Blood Angels at Duke Hammer GT1. Dark Angels at Dicing Death 4 as a 2nd place finisher, just after the winner, which was Orks. And last but certainly not least, White Scars at Nightfall the Tracy Crusade, using their brand new Spear Point Task Force that is less than a week old and already winning GTs. Absolutely insane. Necrons also saw an undefeated result at the Coventry 2-day. Adeptus Custodes also undefeated at the Paragon City Game Store Championships. Death Guard winning the Orktoberfest 2025. Chaos Demons winning the hilariously well-named Hell's Basement GT. Adeptus Mechanicus at RCM Night of the Wolf, Thousand Suns at Oktoberspellen, Emperor's Children taking down NRW Winter 40k Singles, that's the LGT winner, Liam VSL, going undefeated there. And as I mentioned before, last but certainly not least, Orks at Dicing Death 4. And with that, we're going to go ahead and hop on into these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by the Magnet Baron. Magnet Baron is your one-stop shop for all of your miniature magnetization needs. If you are looking to get into some of the new big stompy factions that have just released, Magnet Baron wants me to talk to you about their new no-drill magnet kits. These are kits that apply alongside large miniatures like Imperial Knights and give you replacement parts as well as magnets that allow you to utilize the entire kit, adding specialized attachments and joints that allow you to add magnets into the construction of the model, allowing you to easily swap your weapons on and off. With how fast the metagame of 10th edition Warhammer 40k changes, having flexible weapon options on your models just makes sense, and especially for these expensive vehicle and Titan kits that have a wide variety of options available to them, magnets are the way to go. So check them out at themagnetbaron.com. Links are in the video description. Big thanks to Magnet Baron for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Now, starting with our meta frontrunners, Tau Empire, they took down the Coventry 2-day with Tony Barrett going undefeated with a Monka detachment. Monka was extremely popular this week when we saw a lot of factions utilizing that early game assault to get lines of fire around areas of the battlefield early. This included Commander Shadow Sun, an Ethereal with Strategic Conquerors for an OC bonus on a particular objective, alongside a Firesight team with Strike Swiftly. Strike Swiftly is actually a great inclusion on the Firesight team. It gives you a ton of early game flexibility. This enhancement gives you scout on 2 things within 6 inches of the character. The big downside is that oftentimes your characters either want to start in reserve or they want to start in transports if they're things like Cadre Fireblades or Crisis Battleship Commanders. However, the Firesight team is a lone operative. It can infiltrate, so it's able to start up above in front of your army and then easily either target something that's important in your front lines, so something like a Devilfish or a Battlesuit team or even like a Riptide, Broadside Battlesuits, things like that, to give them scout and initiate an early game alpha strike, or they can give also themselves or other infiltrator scouts to give you an early midboard presence or protect them from early game aggression. It's a phenomenal place for this enhancement, and it's one of the most interesting things about this attachment is where that enhancement goes, because it changes a lot about how you deploy. Now, from there have a Devilfish, a Broadside Battlesuit team, the 2 Broadside Battlesuits. Those guys are equipped with high-yield missile pods. We do have a +1 AP stratagem in Mon-Ka, so we're able to get those missile pods up to AP2 Ignore Cover, which is the value where they start to do serious damage to a lot of targets. And with lethal hits from the detachment ability in the early game as well, you can make use of those mid-strength weapons into high toughness enemies without having to worry about bouncing off of those toughness characteristics. We then have 2 Ghost Kill Battlesuits to lock down the midboard early. Again, those things can infiltrate up alongside the Firesight team and then be scouted, potentially, so you can protect them from enemies early, or you can use them to move block. 2 Hammerhead gunships, both of those equipped with ion cannons. A Kroot Carnivore squad, again, more scouting, alongside a bunch of additional Kroot. 2 Hound squads for utility. A Krootox Rampager squad that can bully the middle of the table early, as well as a single Krootox Rider for some more utility. From there, we have 3 Pathfinder teams. One of those is going to be inside the Devilfish to push the Devilfish up with their scout. The other 2 can either play aggressively and use themselves to move block and get early game attacks, or obviously act as spotters in the late game. But I think generally speaking, you're going to try to use these guys to bully the middle of the table very early. One downside of Mon-Ka is that if you don't play aggressively, you do not get the benefit of the detachment ability in the first battle round if your opponent is hiding from you. And things like Pathfinders, things like the Strike Swiftly Firesight team allow you to push your units up so far that you're going to be able to get those lethal hits on target on turn 1 and start to pick off your opponent's utility units and things that can really try to disrupt your score. And then from there, if you can lock them in their deployment zone and sort of jail them, you can try to win the game off the back of your shooting attacks towards the late game. We do have a unit of 5 Vespid Sting Wings for utility as well, and a Riptide Battlesuit. Only one of these, but it is equipped with an Ion Accelerator. So this list is trading a lot of the damage you'd expect from a lot of Tau armies. Sometimes we see things like mass gunships, plus 3 Hammerheads, plus other shooting attacks. In this case, we're going to be focusing on Broadside Battlesuits and lots of board control. Tons of Pathfinders, tons of Ghost Kills, things that can continuously score in the middle of the table. Make use of those lethal hits in the early game and try to prevent your opponent from getting a lead early so that you can sort of rely on those backline guns later on. Very interesting variety of Tau Empire. Now, from there, we're going to stick with Coventry today, and we're going to talk about Vic Vige's list, who also went undefeated. This is an Aeldari aspect host, and we've seen a lot of these pieces of technology before. This includes Asterman, Fuegan, Chainzar, Lycus, and Malgan Ra. We do have 1 Wave Serpent alongside a Falcon. There is a unit of Dire Avengers, as well as 2 units of Dark Reapers, and a unit of 5 Fire Dragons. So we have attachments for all of the Phoenix Lords. We have Howling Banshees for Janezar, we have Dire Avengers for Asterman, we have Fire Dragons for Fuegan, and we have Dark Reapers for Malgan Ra, as well as Lycus and her basically ever-present Warp Spiders. Now, the interesting thing here is that we're probably going to be splitting these units into the various transports. There is only a single Falcon and a single Wave Serpent. We can use the Wave Serpent to deliver things like the Howling Banshees early and then fill in that spot with units that we're going to use Skyborn Sanctuary to try to protect. You also have essentially a free re-embarkation from Azerman squad alongside Dire Avengers. Now, both Asterman and Malgan Ra have potentially devastating ranged attacks, which gets a huge benefit from the Falcon. One thing that often happens, though, is that Azerman, when he jumps out, he uses his once per game ability to gain devastating wounds and anti-infantry. And you can use the Aspect Shrine tokens as well as wound rerolls from the Falcon to do additional damage on that one turn. Once that turn's over, he doesn't necessarily need to benefit from the Falcon anymore. However, Malgan Ra has a permanently devastating wound weapon, so you could potentially just use Malgan Ra to constantly be recycling cycling into the Falcon after that to give yourself the maximum number of rerolls onto your devastating wound weapons. That's not to say that Astromon can just fill in either behind a ruin, pushing forward to take objectives, or you can hop into the Wave Serpent after other units like Fuegan and his team, as well as Jansar, have already committed. So there's a lot of places for these units to hide, and obviously beyond that, we just have a ton of utility units. 3 units of 5 Rangers to dominate the middle of the table, score a ton of points. 3 units of Swooping Hawks to use their fast movement in order to get around the table to consistently score tactical secondaries and to do mortal wounds with their grenade launchers, plus 3 units of Warp Spiders, because Warp Spiders are just really, really good. Mostly Eldar Aspect Host good stuff. Now from there, we're going to move to the BZU 40k GT, and we're going to talk about Douglas Labov and his World Eaters. Now, Douglas was playing the Vessels of Wrath detachment, which is an interesting one that we don't see very often, and it gets very commonly overshadowed by Berserker Warband. But this one allows you to select a character or unit champion at the start of each battle round to grant an additional Blessing of Khorne to. So you're going to have units that can essentially permanently have things like Fight on Death or Lethal plus Sustained hits active to improve their damage output. The detachment also has huge bonuses for things that can benefit from this detachment ability. This includes things like Brazen Contempt, which can give a Vessel of Khorne unit that's currently being a universal -1 to be wounded, full wound rerolls against monsters' vehicles for infantry, mounted, or Demon Prince units. So lots of ways to make the normally relatively mid-powered World Eaters characters hit even harder. Beyond the fact that Angron can respawn in addition to the Blessings of Khorne that are given out by the detachment, there's not a ton of particular synergy from the detachment with Angron himself, but he does pull focus from a lot of the other things like Demon Princes and similar units that are going to be running up the table. You can use Brazen Contempt on him, which gives him a transhuman bodyguard style of effect. So if the strength characteristic of an attacking unit is higher than his toughness, it will get -1 to be wounded. So you can make Angron a little tougher in that way, which can certainly help. From there, we're running 2 Winged Demon Princes. One of them has Gateways to Glory, which allows you to move through terrain features, which is huge for that guy. It makes him significantly more maneuverable than normal. We also have 3 Lords on Juggernaut, no less than 3 of these guys. However, we don't have a ton of attachments for them. I think you're going to be attaching them into units of 8-bound in order to improve the movement characteristic of those 8-bound. We also have a Slaughterbound with Arch Slaughterer, which is going to give it +1 armor penetration and +1 damage if it becomes a Vessel of Wrath. So that Slaughterbound can run in, hit something, be chosen as a Vessel of Wrath to get sustained and lethal hits, plus 1 other blessing that you might have rolled for regularly for your army. Then you can even use that for extended engage. You can even use that for extended pile-in and consolidates, for example, and slingshot him into something particularly scary. And then he's going to be hitting with his characteristic 9 attacks on his go turn at 3 damage, AP3 devastating. That's a very scary profile. From there, we have a unit of Khorne Berserkers. These guys can attach one of those Juggernaut Lords, plus a unit of Chaos Spawn and a unit of Jackals for the backline. From there, we also have a unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound. I'm not 100% sure, but I would be surprised if one of these 8-bound units, probably the 6 Exalted, didn't attach the Slaughterbound. That can give the Slaughterbound potentially +1 additional damage, so he can go up to 4 damage once he's chosen as a Vessel of Wrath. And then, because the unit's large, there's a non-zero chance, especially because you could use defensive stratagems, so things like -1 to be wounded on them, that they actually survive, and then the Slaughterbound can respawn them with his leadership ability, something that very rarely matters, because oftentimes his unit just immediately dies as soon as he commits into the fight. But with defensive strats as powerful as we have in Vessels of Wrath, we might even be able to keep them alive for longer. We have 2 smaller units of 8-bound, a standard 8-bound unit, and an exalted 8-bound unit, and those are good attachment slots for the 2 additional Lords on Juggernauts. Really fascinating list for this one. It has a massive number of selections for Vessels of Wrath. You cannot select Angron because it is non-epic hero characters, but all of these Lords on Juggernaut, all of these Demon Princes, the Slaughterbound, and all of the unit champions inside the Exalted 8-bound and Khorne Berserker units are all eligible targets, so we can empower any of those with those additional effects and improve stratagems if you are the Vessel of Khorne, which is super cool. Now from there, we're going to move over to the Coventry 3-day, the largest event of the weekend. And we're going to talk about Jack Tight, aka Skauki, who you might recognize from T5S2 Season 2. He's actually a previous T5S2 Season champion for the circuit that I run online. He took down that event with Adepta Sororitas, and not any Adepta Sororitas, but a Bringers of Flame list. Now, this style of sisters, I'm actually surprised doesn't see more play. Obviously, the detachment is more aggressive and transport-oriented. It's basically a carbon copy of the Firestorm Assault Force that we have from the Space Marine Codex. However, the big difference here is that Adepta Sororitas, while playing essentially the same brick of stratagems and a very similar detachment ability, have a ton of really powerful scouting units. So the huge benefit that this detachment can bring is the ability to just push massive numbers of powerful scouting units with meltas, multi-meltas, and other scary weapons across the battlefield, and really force the fight onto your opponent's side of the table from the early game. One thing we've been seeing, and we see this with this style of list, as well as things like the Montclaw detachment from Tau, there is a lot to be said for playing aggressively early. I think Chapter Approved 2025, as we have been learning, as the community has improved in the format, that early game aggression is oftentimes the name of the game, especially if you're going first. And this detachment loves going first because it has so much forward pressure. Now, the first inclusion here is actually incredibly interesting. It's Astrid Thurga and Agatha Dolan, who I have literally, I don't think, ever seen in a list before, so I have to go read their datasheet and tell you what they do. The first thing is that each time you destroy an enemy unit, you gain a miracle dice. When Agatha Dolan is destroyed themselves, you gain D3 back. Their leadership ability grants devastating wounds to weapons equipped in the unit. From there, we have 2 Immolators and 2 Sororitas Rhinos. The cool thing about this is that we can really maximize the amount of scouting units that we have. This is because we have 2 Dominion squads. Both of those are equipped with 4 Meltaguns. These can combat squad the Meltagun equipped sisters into the Immolators because they are dedicated transports. They then grant the Immolators scout, so the Immolators are able to run up the table. We then have 2 Sanctifier squads. The Sanctifiers are an interesting kill team unit of a bunch of unique models, but they come with a ton of flame weapons. You can give these flame weapons devastating wounds for 2 CP inside this detachment, which can give them some pretty serious damage if you need to, but they also naturally have scout as well. They are too large to go into an Immolator, but they can fit inside a Rhino. So we have 2 Immolators and 2 Rhinos, 4 transports that can all scout up. If you have the board space as well, the Dominion squads can also scout. The combat squatted bolter infantry can also scout up the table as well. And there's a stratagem inside the detachment to advance, transport, and disembark. So you can be moving 4 transports 6 inches up, move one of them potentially 18 inches further up the table, then disembark a unit and fire 4 meltas into somebody, or a bunch of flamers, whichever one that you want. And then on the flip side, you're also then basically putting another 8 units into the center of the table with all of those scouting infantry and transports. If your opponent's not prepared for it, you can absolutely ruin them early game. The other thing too is that obviously those Rhinos have a firing deck. You can fire the Sanctifier Flamer attacks off the top of the firing deck as well, and those units will respawn models. So even if the Rhino's destroyed, you disembark out of the Rhino into a safe position, lose a couple models to disembarking from a destroyed transport, you can then regenerate those models back, come back into the fight on the subsequent turn. This army is incredibly aggressive when it needs to be. It's so fast, it's able to close the distance if you are trying to play KG against it, and very much like the Montclaw list we just talked about previously, it has the capacity to just simply devastate you in the early game, even if it goes first, which is generally an unfavored seat in Chapter Approved 2025. So these armies with mass forward operation are good at both going first and going second. Now, I guess it's important to note as well, in this list, we do have a Morven Vol and a Paragon Warsuit team for a ton of armor cracking. We also have 3 Retributor squads. Like I talked about before, this army is going to trade a lot of units, are going to lose a lot of stuff before the end of the game, so those Retributor squads are most likely going to have all of their bonuses active because they get bonuses when they attack a unit that destroyed a Sororitas unit. We also have 2 Castigator autocannon equipped Castigators for backline shooting, alongside a Canoness for utility with Iron Surplus of Saint Istalela to make her a little bit tougher to kill. Now, from there, we're going to move over to the Team Battle Brothers GT and Ryan Kerrer, who went undefeated at the event, actually winning it with a Tyranid invasion fleet. This included Death Leaper, a Hive Tyrant, as well as a Nero Tyrant. We had a bunch of Termagants, 2 units of 10, as well as a Hormagant unit of 10 for disrupting opposing objectives as well. A bunch of backline shooting from 3 Exocrines into 2 Tyranofexes. Those can obviously then be protected by things like rapid regeneration from the detachment to give them a feel no pain. And that's a lot of backline shooting. It's Rupture Cannons on both those Tyranofexes, so tons and tons tons of anti-tank shooting that can all be buffed up by the Hive Tyrant's lethal hits and assault aura. We do have some melee or some midboard control from a single Haru Specs, as well as a Maleceptor. We have a Neurolictor to try to buff that shooting with +1 to wound against battle-shocked enemies, a Biovore for scoring, as well as a Zoanthrope unit that can attach into the Neuro Tyrant. So far, pretty standard Tyranid stuff, just a big bug gun line that's going to shoot a lot of people to death. Now, moving over to GaleCon, this one was won by Leagues of Votann. Paul Quigley went undefeated with a Delve Assault Shift. While we've been seeing a basically endless cavalcade of Needguard Oathbands recently, in this case, we are taking the Chthonian Berserk-focused detachment. Now, Paul here was taking a Brokir Iron Master with Delve Work Navigator. That allows you to pay yield points to regenerate Chthonian Berserks back into your units. The interesting thing here is that that gives you an outlet for your yield points in order to spend down so you don't necessarily get into Fortified Takeover. The reason that you don't want to is that a lot of your stratagems, things like Weave Work Buttress, which is a universal -1 to be wounded against shooting attacks for your infantry, trigger only if you are in hostile acquisition, the early phase of the Votann army ability. The other thing too, obviously, is that regenerating your Chthonian Berserks to get them closer to the enemy and easier charges is a huge deal. We have a call with Pile Driver to improve his damage by, again, spending additional yield points. We have Uthar the Destined for some free stratagems, so things like improving the speed of our Chthonian Berserks, or again, making them harder to kill with Weave Work Buttress can be free once per battle round. 4 units of Chthonian Berserks, 2 units of 5, as well as 2 units of 10. A single Capricus Carrier to carry around a Hernkin Jaeger squad that can split into 5s. Plus a Chthonian Earthshaker unit, which can keep the heads down on a lot of opposing infantry. A Brokir Thunderkin unit to strip cover from enemies, especially in order to buff the 2 Hecaton land fortresses that are also in the list. Now, the Hecaton land fortresses can carry a combination of those Chthonian Berserks, as well as the Brokir Thunderkin. And we have a 10 model Einhir Hearthguard unit. Too large to go into any of the transports, but you can keep these guys in reserve early. We have a teleport crest on the Thane for the unit, so they're able to start in reserve, and then rapid ingress onto enemies that are trying to deal with the Hecaton land fortress. Again, we can use things like Weave Work Buttress to protect them, so while they don't have any explicit synergy with the detachment ability, which only buffs your Chthonian Berserks, you can still get use out of these guys. So you're basically going to be threatening your opponent with a massive number of deep striking infantry. All the Berserks plus the Hearthguard are all going to be deep striking onto the battlefield, or at least threatening deep strikes onto the battlefield, and you can deliver at least a couple of them with the Hecaton land fortresses on the battlefield. Try to keep your opponent off balance. If they ever come in to deal with the land fortresses, rapid ingresses are going to absolutely ruin your day. Obviously, if they don't aggressively screen and give you things to kill and objectives to take, you're just going to be able to use those ingresses or those deep strikes to get yourself closer and use things like Augmented Assault to power your Chthonian Berserk charges up and push into your opponent's deployment zone. Really interesting build here, focusing on the combination of the Hearthguard and the Berserks. And the Hearthguard, in fairness, are a good delivery system for the call with the Pile Driver, which allows you to add up to +2 to the damage characteristic of his melee attacks. Alongside lethal hits, that gives him a greater chance to convert those melee attacks, which is obviously going to be strong. Now, moving on from there, let's start talking about Space Marine factions. And we're going to start with a very interesting Ultramarines list from the Rumble on the Rivers. This was won by Zachary Morales running Ultramarines, but not Gladius Task Force Ultramarines that we would see a bunch of times. This is, in fact, an Ironstorm Spearhead detachment. The detachment that gives you a floating hit or wound reroll on every single unit in your army. This includes a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, Robute Gilliman, a Tech Marine with Target Augury Web to give lethal hits to a nearby vehicle, and a Tech Marine with Master of Machine War to give advance and shoot to a nearby vehicle. We are buffing a bunch of vehicles with those, including 2 Vindicators, 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, a Brutalis Dreadnought for some late-game counter-punching in melee to anything that tries to bounce off of the solid wall that are Redemptor Dreadnoughts in the center of the battlefield, a Gladiator Reaper to add a little bit of anti-infantry shooting. Incredibly strong if you're expecting to go into MSU armies with many smaller infantry units. This guy is basically able to just go in and clear those out by himself. He also has special synergy with Ironstorm Spearhead because of the Mercy is Weakness stratagem. Gives you 5+ critical hits for 2 CP, which is a little expensive if you are a vehicle, and the Gladiator Reaper gains sustained hits 2 with its Gatling Cannon against infantry, giving you 5 up critical, sustained 2. By himself, with the use of potentially Oath of Moment plus that strat, he can wipe out enormous numbers of infantry all on his own. We then have 2 units of 5 Assault Jump Pack Intercessors in order to act as utility units, an Infiltrator Squad to protect the backline, and a Scout Squad for some more scoring potential. Very cool to see some wins from non-Gladius Task Force Ultramarines. It's always cool to see these guys doing well with something that isn't the stock standard Space Marine build. Now, speaking of the stock standard Space Marine build, let's talk about the second place finisher from that same event, Rumble on the Rivers GT. Brenton Weiss, who went undefeated with Shadowmark Talon. It's the normal Shadowmark Talon list. We've seen it basically every week, and it hasn't changed. So the interesting thing here that Brenton did take is Inferno Pistols on all of his Vanguard veterans. So he has that small Melta attack on every single one of these guys. One of them's going to have Cave and Strike to advance, shoot, charge. The other one's going to have that Hunter's Instinct, so we can rapid ingress early with the Space Marine Captain, the Jump Pack Captain, to then move up, shoot, charge. So we have basically staggered attacks from the Vanguard veterans. In some cases, you take one of them with shields in order to absorb more damage on the turn that they commit in, and use the other one to then commit the Inferno Pistol shots in on an Oath of Moment target. In this case, we're just going to be getting the most damage out of both of them, which I guess is the only real difference from many of the other Raven Guard lists we've seen, but otherwise it is basically identical. However, what is not identical are some of the other detachments that we are seeing do well, like Martin Bramer Nielsen's list from Dukrahammer GT. This is an Angelic Inheritors Blood Angels list. This is the character-focused attachment that gives you benefits on your characters, things like reroll once to hit and wound or fall back and operate. All of these are extremely strong buffs, and the interesting thing about this army here is that it's very starkly divided between either character melee units that you can engage into your opponent with and be very consistent with high weapon scale characteristics and rerolls, and then units that will benefit from Oath of Moment by shooting at your opponent. So, in this case, we're running 2 Jump Pack Captains plus Commander Dante. These are all going to attach into Sanguinary Guard squads. And obviously, Sanguinary Guard now have a 2+ weapon scale baseline. So when they engage in alongside the detachment ability, they're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s all the time. Incredible efficiency. We then also have Mephiston and Sanguinor and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant as lone operatives that can run around to gain the benefit of that detachment ability and just score you points and generally be annoying to your opponent. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant has Ordained Sacrifice, which allows him to respawn when killed, so not only do you have to deal with lone operative, stealth, feel no pain, and his reactive move, but when he dies, he might not even be dead in real life. It's pretty crazy. We do have an Infiltrator squad, which can buff the ranged attacks. That includes 2 Vindicators and 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts. All of those vehicles can basically operate independently. We can Oath of Moment something that the Vindicators want to shoot. The Ballistus Dreadnoughts get hit rerolls anyway. We can use the Incursors to buff shooting against one of those targets, and then they all operate totally by themselves. Obviously, the character units will get rerolls in melee anyway, so the whole list is rerolling most of its hit rolls the entire time without really any much input required from the remainder of the army, which is very self-sufficient. We have an Intercessor squad to hold down the backline, in addition to a Scout squad for utility and an Infiltrator squad. Very well-rounded list. In the past, I've certainly underestimated Angelic Inheritors, but since the Sanguinary Guard update, now that unit is significantly better at dealing with enemies using the now that that unit is significantly better with the hit rerolls that you gain from the detachment ability, I think that the Angelic Inheritors may have overtaken Liberator Assault Group as one of the stronger detachments for Blood Angels. Now from there, we're going to move over to the Dicing Death 4 and talk about some Dark Angels in the Wrath of the Rock detachment. They did not win the event here, but they did take second place with Tanner Hebert at the helm. And this is a very mounted, focused Wrath of the Rock detachment, which does benefit from the detachment ability of -1 to be wounded if the incoming strength is higher than your toughest characteristic. A very good benefit for a lot of T5 bikes, which are gonna very susceptible to sort of heavy infantry clearing attacks. This army includes 2 Raven Wing command squads, one of them with Lord of the Raven Wing, which gives you reroll advance and charge rolls. This can be used alongside Tactical Mastery, which allows you to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which you advance. Alongside all the Plasma Talons you're getting inside these units, they love to be able to deal damage on the way in because they are relatively short ranged, but actually have kind of an insane damage output, especially if you are using stratagems like Relics of the Dark Age for +2 strength. That can give you a massive number of strength 10 plasma shots into lightly armored vehicles or things like that. Will actually let you kill something on the way in, then charge and do a bunch of damage. We then have a Raven Wing command squad with Ancient Weapons, a melee enhancement to give +2 strength, +1 damage, and +1 armor penetration characteristic. This guy's likely jumping into an Outrider squad, which can provide them an additional +1 damage characteristic and strength as well. On top of that enhancement, once you declare a charge with those guys. We have a ton of additional characters: Asriel, a Judiciar, a Combi Lieutenant, and Lionel Johnson, the big man himself. So several fights first threats, and the Judiciar and Asriel can alternatively attach into Sternguard veterans or a big unit of Inner Circle companions based on what you need. I have a sneaking suspicion that Asriel's going to be hanging out with the Sternguard veterans and the Judiciar with the Inner Circle companions, but it could be the other way as well. Those guys are going to be backing up a pair of Deathwing Knight units to act as a solid front line that you can then heroically intervene with those fight-firsting units to protect, alongside a Ministorm Priest to hold down the back line and a Scout Squad for utility. Very cool army. It's going to play very aggressively with these Ravenwing Black Knight units that can basically pull double duty as both shooting and melee threats. They're relatively difficult to kill, and then even once you get in there to counterattack them, you could see Lionel Johnson picking himself up into reserve, immediately rapid ingress down on your opponent's turn, heroically intervene, fight first, and try to kill whatever's dealing with them. Extremely cool build. Now with that, we're going to move down to the Nightfall Tracy Crusade GT for the headliner of this week, the new and improved Spear Point Task Force White Scars, which are already taken down an event. This is Ruben Zhao, we've talked about several times on this channel, taking down that GT with this new detachment. Now, for those who don't know and who hasn't seen the content around this one, this is basically a redux of the old Stormlands Task Force, but specifically for White Scars. And we are including the new White Scars character, Suboden Khan. Now, Spear Point Task Force is largely just a separate version of the original Stormlands Task Force. It does give you some interesting things you can do, like put mounted units into strategic reserve at the end of your opponent's fight phase. You can also do things like get lance and lethal hits for mounted units or lance for other units. So it allows you to make a little bit more play with things like infantry, which is nice. Mobile lethality also allows you to fall back or advance and still shoot, which allows it to play a little bit more flexibly with ranged attackers. So in this case, we are playing Suboden Khan. We do have an Outrider squad to hit for him to hop into. He does have an additional rules clause if he is inside the Spear Point Task Force, which allows his unit to move 6 inches after destroying an enemy unit in melee. Now, Suboden Khan is anti-monster, anti-vehicle 4+. He has lance, and he gets that bonus damage as we just talked about with the Raven Wing list from the Intercessor squad when you charge with those guys. So this dude is going to have a pretty solid shot at killing whatever he hits on the charge and then reactive moving back into safety. Given the fact that the unit is also able to advance and charge, has reactive moves naturally, and the ability to move through walls thanks to Suboden Khan's leadership ability, it's an extremely flexible little package. Now from there, we also have an Apothecary. He's going to hop into a unit of Hellblasters. Hellblaster unit's a nice little sort of a skirmishing unit. You can use reactive moves because it's an infantry unit to keep it relatively safe from enemy melee attacks. You can fall back and shoot with it. And even when you kill your models with their own hazardous checks, you're going to be able to regenerate them thanks to the Apothecary. We have a Captain with Spear Point Paragon. That's an additional strength and EP bonus, +2 to each when you're on the charge. And we have an Assault Intercessor squad to hang out with him, so he can do the classic thing of using Finest Hour and getting wound rerolls and triggering a bunch of devastating damage. We have a Standard Lieutenant equipped with Hunter's Eye to grant sustained hits and ignore cover to his unit. The important thing there is that he can jump into the Hellblaster squad. You can target your Oath of Moment target, overcharge your weapons, regenerate them if they die thanks to the Apothecary. And then with the Lieutenant, we're both sustained and lethal hits. We can fish for any of those results that we want to, and each of those hits is going to be AP3 ignore cover for multiple damage, wounding most targets in the game on 4s, if not better, thanks to the Oath of Moment wound bonus, which you do get in this detachment because it is now in the new Space Marine faction pack. We have an Assault Jump Pack Intercessor squad for utility, a Centurion Assault squad, which is an interesting little inclusion here. These guys do get a nice little movement bonus from Advance and Charge from the detachment ability, basically doubling their base movement characteristic with average dice, and we have a Land Raider Redeemer that is going to be delivering them. We could also potentially advance, shoot, and charge them for a command point as well, allowing them to get their twin-linked melted guns into range onto an Oath of Moment target or something similar before they get into a heavy enemy. We have an Incursor squad to get +1 to hit to things like the Hellblaster, so we can fish for those critical hit effects, an Infiltrator squad to hold down the backline, a Land Raider Redeemer to commit these big heavy melee breaks into the center of the table, as well as 2 Repulsor Executioners. Obviously Obviously, these guys can advance and shoot for a command point or fall back and shoot, so they are just solid delivery systems for units like the Assault Intercessors and Captain, while also being just a enormous boatload of ranged attacks, good at clearing a multitude of enemies, whether that's going to be lightly armored targets with their defensive arrays or heavy stuff with their laser destroyers, plus a scout squad for utility. So ultimately, this is largely just sort of 3 toughness 12 hulls between the Land Raider and the 2 Repulsor Executioners. All of those are delivering very scary attack profiles. The Hellblaster squad could be delivered by the Redeemer. They can just hop out and trade damage with people. The Centurion Assault squad can then pile in the Redeemer, and we can deliver them alongside a lot of these Intercessors and Assault Intercessors into the fight with the Repulsor Executioners. All the while, Suboden Khan's going to be over there jumping in and out of melees and trying to clear enemies off of the formation. This is a weird looking list, especially for a detachment like Spear Point Task Force, where you see a bunch of large vehicles, but the flexibility of the new Spear Point Task Force detachment definitely lends itself to an army like this, where you have an almost Gladius Task Force style of effects that allows you to fall back, advance, charge. You still have ways to fall back, advance, and shoot, while also getting some additional abilities like this really powerful melee unit in Suboden Khan himself. Now, just when you might have thought we were done talking about the Coventry 2-day, it's not the case. We're still going with this massive event. We're going to talk about James McMurray this time, running Necrons. James was running a Star Shatter arsenal. And to be fair, most of this stuff was pretty standard. We have a Catacomb Command Barge with Dread Majesty to provide rerolls and OC characteristic, Imhotep the Stormlord to fuel the army with command points, a Psychomancer to knock enemies off objective with Battleshock checks, a Scorpec Lord with Chrono Impedance fields to give -1 damage to the Silent King, plus a standard Scorpec Lord to just hit people with a big sword, the Silent King himself to grant that movement bonus, or another instance of rerolls to buff 3 Doomsday Arcs. And then we have a bunch of utility units. This includes a Triarch Stalker, which he can use with its scout move to Chrono Impedance Field and lock down the middle of the table. But we also have an Ophidian Destroyer unit for up-down, and 2 Flayed One units. The interesting part are a pair of Triarch Praetorian units. Now, these guys are very rarely seen, but they are effectively jump infantry. They're able to reroll charge rolls, which makes them skirmish over objectives fairly well, and in this case, we are playing their Rods of the Covenant, which is a 3-attack, 2-damage melee weapon that also comes packing a 2-damage gunshot as well. This allows the unit to put out a grand total of 20 2-damage attacks between shooting and melee, with the +1 to hit when targeting enemies on objective from the Star Shatter Arsenal detachment ability. So these guys are able to deep strike in or act as a rapid ingress threat, and then just hop in and knock a utility unit off an objective very reliably. They hit on 2s, they are AP2, multi-damage. Even if you're standing there with 5 Space Marines, there's an extremely reasonable chance that a unit of 5 Triarch Praetorians are just going to be able to kill them, which is not something that Necrons can typically do. I think these guys are a little expensive for what they end up doing, and especially since they're largely going to cost command points to actually commit onto objectives if you are spending a rapid ingress to try to get them in there. However, they are a very unique unit that offers a credible melee and short range threat with a long movement characteristic, something that not much else in Necrons actually offers. And in Star Shatter Arsenal, it makes them more consistent in actually performing that role, where they can kill enemies on objectives. Very nice inclusion. Now with that, we'll move over to the Paragon Games Store Championships, which was won by Adeptus Custodes. We did have Tyranids coming in as the runner-up, but Custodes did actually win the event. Derek Holder taking this one down with Lions of the Emperor, and some interesting inclusions. This includes Valerian, the character shield captain, who makes his unit more difficult to kill in melee. Now we're rocking a standard inclusion at the top here, an Alaris Terminator Captain with Admana Mortis to dramatically improve his melee attacks, but we also then have a Dawn Eagle Jetbike Shield Captain with Fierce Conqueror. I think this enhancement sort of flew under the radar for a while, because not many people took it until I think people realized exactly how strong it is. It gives you an additional 2 attacks for every 5 models within 6 inches of the bearer at the start of each fight phase. This is not restricted in any way. You can get +2 attacks for each 5 models within range of you, so if you charge into a unit of 10 enemies, and all of those enemies are within 6 inches of you, which when you look at a 6-inch aura on the size of base that a Dawn Eagle Jetbike Shield Captain is, it's actually an enormous proportion of the battlefield. He's actually getting +4 additional attacks for only 15 points. It's also important to note that he doesn't have to be engaging the enemies that are granting him this attack bonus, they just have to be near him. So if he charges a tank or something spooky, and is also next to an enemy utility unit, like let's say 5 Space Marine Scouts, those Space Marine scouts will actually grant him +2 attacks that he can then use to beat the tank standing next to them to death. It's actually a very versatile enhancement. It's only 15 points, and it's more oftentimes useful than you would expect. Now, from there, we have a Custodian Guard squad that's going to attach with Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, a tale as old as time, match made in heaven. We have 2 Caladius Grav tanks for backline shooting and a Laris Custodian squad to attach in with the Shield Captain alongside a Custodian Warden squad. That's going to attach with Valerian and combo together their own built-in -1 to be wounded, their 4+ fail no pain, and Valerian's Arbor of Contempt style effect, which is going to give them which is going to give enemies -1 AP in melee against the unit. We do have a Virtus Praetor squad to hang out with the Shield Captain. They can obviously then use his end of fight phase move. You can use Gilded Champion to refresh that move. So if these guys are able to consistently charge into enemies, get the benefit of that Fierce Conqueror to deal additional damage, clear what they attack, and then jump into a safe position, you can consistently do that at least 2 times per game to get a bunch of free value out of this unit. We then have a Prosecutor squad to hold down the backline, as well as a Witch Seeker squad and a Calidus Assassin to act as utility. Now, moving over to the winner of Orktoberfest 2025, we'll talk about some Death Guard. Joshua Woods was running a Virulent Victorium Death Guard detachment and going undefeated at the event. This list included the big man himself, Mortarion. He's going to be protecting a pair of Plague Marine squad. Now, these are 10 model Plague Marine squads with all the fixings, a bunch of Melta-guns, Plasma guns, Plague Spewers, everything attached into them, alongside the combination of a Biologist, Putrefier, and a Malignant Plaguecaster. This gives them sustained hits 1 when targeting afflicted enemies, thanks to the Plaguecaster, as well as lethal hits on every weapon that doesn't normally have it, which is most of their weapons anyway, from the Biologist Putrefier, as well as critical 5-ups. So you're going to get lethal and sustain from the combination of those 2 characters on a 5, and you're getting wound rerolls on those sustained hits from the Chaos Rhino that these guys are going to be attaching into. Now, the nice thing as well is that you do get a reactive move if you're within 6 inches of Mortarion. So if this unit is able to find a target in the center of the battlefield, it can run up its Rhino, disembark out of the Rhino, blast the crap out of it to absolutely annihilate it, and then as your opponent comes in to try to deal with it, you can then just reactive move back, hop into the Rhino. It's likely that that unit then survives. If the opponent can even destroy the Rhino, you then hop out, put a bunch of OC on whatever objective you're fighting over, objective secure it thanks to Virulent Victorium, and just move on to the next target. While this does create kind of a smaller model count from a lot of Death Guard armies, it does create a very, very powerful mid-board presence, which is able to kill almost anything in the game. The combination of the Plaguecaster, Putrefier, and the Rhino is incredibly strong. Those guys being backed up by Mortarion is also very flexible, and you just have to hope that the rest of your army can fight over the other areas of the battlefield. Speaking of the rest of the army, we do have a unit of Chaos Spawn for utility, plus 2 units of 10 Poxwalkers. The nice thing here is that these Poxwalkers do objective secure things out in the center of the battlefield with Infiltrate, assuming you go first, which is very nice. We have 2 Plague Spitter Fetid Bloat Drones for some additional fast, quote-unquote, fast-moving utility, plus 3 Heavy Blight Launcher Fetid Bloat Drones for some backline shooting. Now, moving on from there, let's talk about some Chaos Demons. We're going to keep on the Chaos theme for the next couple of lists here, I think. Jake Chalmers took down the Hell's Basement GT, incredibly appropriately named, with one of the most unique varieties of Chaos Demons I've seen in a really long time. And I actually really love this build. It has a bunch of overlapping stacking buffs, which is one of my favorite things that demons can do. In this case, you're playing a Demonic Incursion. This is the redeployment style focused detachment in the faction. Gives you 6-inch deep strikes when you deploy within your Shadow of Chaos. And in that way, it really incentivizes you to play a bunch of units that have this the same Chaos mark, because they're all going to be able to use each other's Shadow of Chaos to deep strike close to enemies. We're running an Exalted Flamer here. We do have a unit of 6 Flamers that the Exalted Flamer can hop into, and these guys can act as a bit of an infantry sweeper, which is going to be nice for the army. Plus, potentially some backline threat that can clear out your opponent's utility unit, something that demons can be weak into, because they don't have a lot of incidental shooting. We then have a Randmaster on a Blood Throne, and this is the first part of this whole combination, which I think is really cool. The other 2 parts of the combination are 2 Grid Unclean ones. One of them is running the Endless Gift to give him a 4+ Feel No Pain and become one of the most difficult models in the entire game to kill. The other one is just a 6+ Feel No Pain. We also then have Rodigus as well, because he's an incredible brick of stats that reduces enemy OC and can really really accentuate your control over the middle of the table. Now, Ronagus gives +1 damage to your Nurgle units, so he can improve the damage characteristic of the Great Unclean Ones or your Plague Bearers or Beasts of Nurgle. So as they are committing into a big fight in the center of the table, they're going to be doing even more damage than normal. Now, the cool thing here is that the Great Unclean Ones are able to reduce enemy toughness by 1 by targeting a unit in the end of the movement phase. The Rendmaster can also improve strength characteristic of Khorne units by 1 by targeting something at the start of the fight phase. He can also give them +1 strength and damage. We're then taking 12 Blood Crushers of Khorne, so a total of 2 units of 6. These guys are able to use the 6-inch deep strike stratagem from the detachment to come in 6 inches away from enemies. They have a demonic instrument, so they get +1 to charges, so they make a 5-inch charge out of reserve. They then do a bunch of impact mortal wounds on the charge, and while their strength characteristic is relatively low, once you're considering that you can reduce enemy toughness characteristics by up to -2 and improve their strength characteristic by an additional 1, you could be hitting toughness 9 enemies and actually winning them on 3s with the Juggernaut's lance attack, the Bladed Horn. While its weapon skill characteristic isn't that great, you're going to be doing enough mortal wounds on the charge. You average 1-ish mortal wound per Blood Crusher, so we're basically half killing most units when we get in there. That then allows the Horn to finish most targets off. These guys are also relatively difficult to kill. They have 4 wounds each, so it's a big brick of stats at OC2 that are going to take up the middle of the table and pull focus from your Great Unclean Ones. It's important to note as well that the Great Unclean Ones can, of course, debuff enemies that they are themselves fighting, so they can improve their own strength versus toughness characteristic comparison. We also have a Screamer unit, which is a tough, extremely fast utility unit. They are difficult to kill with 6 models in the unit, and they can act as a bit of a bully as well. They have anti-monster, anti-vehicle attacks, so they're able to knock into bigger stuff and tie them down for a bit and do a little bit of damage as well. So this army plays really aggressively. It's going to put a bunch of Great Unclean Ones in the center of the table, force your opponent to deal with it, and then use Rampant Ingresses, use 6-inch deep strikes to put Blood Crushers all over the place, use the toughness debuffs and stat buffs overlapping to get those Blood Crushers damage up through the roof and really clean out the things that are coming to engage the Great Unclean Ones. An incredibly unique build that all works together as kind of a big combined combination of effects that can actually get damage out of these units that are generally just objective holders. Now with that, let's move over to Thousand Suns, who did actually put up a 5-0 result this weekend, something that the faction's been sorely missing for a while. In this case, Martin Holtgren at the Oktoberspellen went 5-0 with a Rubrique Phalanx detachment. This is the Rubric infantry focused detachment, and we actually talked about this at length after the Las Vegas Open, where it almost upset the expected result by playing into the final winner twice and actually giving it its toughest game, tying Nemo's Recon Element Guard in at least 1 game. Now, in this case, Martin was playing a very similar list to the one we talked about. In that case, this is 3 Terminator Sorcerers alongside some backline shooting from a pair of Chaos Predator Annihilators, some forward operation from a pair of Sekitar Robots, and a bunch of utility from 3 units of Zangor Enlightened, 2 with Great Bows, 1 without Great Bows, and a standard Zangor squad. From there, the main brick of the army are 3 units of 10 Scarab called Terminators. This gives you an enormous number of very powerful shooting. They're extremely difficult to kill, -1 to be wounded as long as they have an attached character inside, plus their AP reduction effect from the detachment ability. You have access to things like damage reduction effects from the detachment as well. And the big thing here is that you can use Revenge of the Rubrique after any time a sorcerer dies nearby them to fire back at the offending enemy. So you can do things like assign damage to the Scarab Occult Sorcerers inside your Terminator units, take damage on them early, then use their death to fuel the unit shooting back at the opponent. And then given the fact that the Scarab Occults themselves are pretty good in melee and very good at shooting, they're good into a wide variety of situations, and they can really punish enemies for over-engaging into them. One of the strongest detachments remaining for Thousand Suns after their semi-recent nerfs, but definitely cool to see it doing well. And with that, we'll move on to our final Chaos faction for this week. Let's talk about Emperor's Children, who took down the NRW Winter 40k singles. Liam BSL, who we talked about at the LGT, winning that enormous, almost 1,200 player super major with Chaos Space Marines, has moved over to Emperor's Children, and in this case played a coterie of the Conceited. Now, this is a very straightforward list. We've talked about very similar lists to this in the past, and because Emperor's Children for somehow continue to receive points nerfs, despite the fact that they are not performing particularly well, they have basically trimmed all the fat out of a lot of these Coterie of the Conceded builds. The base data sheets for Emperor's Children are very strong. The downside is that they do suffer a little bit of damage output into high toughness enemies. However, you can get around that with things like mortal wounds from Slaaneshi Demon Princes. In this case, you do, as well as Flawless Blades. However, in order to fit those units into your army, you have to cut things like enhancements, which is what we've done here. We are taking 3 Lord Exultant and 2 Winged Demon Princes, in addition to Lucius the Eternal, with literally no enhancements whatsoever, just running the naked guys. We have 3 units of Infractors to attach those Lord Exultants into to give them wound rerolls, plus a pair of Tormentor squads for utility, and a Chaos Spawn unit. The rest of the list is all action. 2 Chaos Rhinos in order to deliver both the Noise Marines and the Infractor squads to the fight, plus 3 units of Noise Marines and a unit of Flawless Blades. The Flawless Blades, once your Coterie of the Conceded abilities are active, do a ton of damage, especially once they get reroll, once they hit and wound, and critical effects on their weapons. They have enough attacks with their recent attack improvement, and their attacks are so high value because they have critical literally the entire game 3+, that they can actually get a ton of work done, but you have to do them late game. You basically have to have this unit hide somewhere in the middle of the table, threaten the middle objective, and then wait until you get to later in the game. These 3 guys will go in, 12 attacks, basically rerolling everything with a bunch of critical hits, winning everything on 3s. They can kill even heavy vehicles fairly easily. So, between them and the Demon Princes, you want those things to go in late. You want the Lord Exultants to trade for enemies early to build your Coterie of the Conceded pledge points, and then you can get that work done. But you do have to play it in a very particular manner. Obviously, Liam BSL is one of the best players in the world, probably in contention for the best player in the world, and he can do that just fine. Now, with that, let's move over to Adeptus Mechanicus and talk about the RCM Knight of the Wolf, which was won by Justin Moore, who took the faction to an undefeated record. This is a really interesting variety of Halo Screed Battleclade. This is the most popular detachment for AdMech right now. The big thing is that it gives you access to advance and charge on multiple units per turn, which allows you to get tons of value out of things like Sicarian Ruststalkers and Infiltrators. Now, you also have access to a 5+ critical hit effect, which is good for things like taser weapons, so Infiltrators with their taser goads, as well as Sidonian Dragoons with taser lances, which is important to note because we're taking 6 of them. Almost the maximum field allowance of Taser Lance Sidonian Dragoons, 3 units of 2, in order to bully the middle of the table with that incredibly long threat range and that very, very solid damage output, especially once you target something that Belisarius Call has targeted with his reroll effect. So let's say your opponent is hiding. They're not trying to get in range of Iron Strider Ballistari, which will just kill them. You can root them out with these extremely fast Taserland Sidonian Dragoons, reroll all your hit rolls to try to fish for 5-up criticals, and then those are all multi-damage lance attacks. So it makes sense that these guys would have an insane damage output, especially considering the fact that we're also bringing 40 Sicarians that are going to be putting pressure on the opponent in a very similar way. This list is insane. It's basically a melee pressure jail list from Adeptus Mechanicus. It uses a little bit of backline shooting from 2 units of Iron Strider Ballistari, so if you do ever run into the center of the table, they will just kill you if you try to trade with the Sidonian Dragoons and the Sicarians in a fair fight, but otherwise they will just continuously send waves of these giant mounted units or Sicarians into your deployment zone to try and lock you in. We also have 2 units of Tyraxes Sky Stalkers in order to continuously do that. They're great utility as well as jail units because they can move, shoot, move again. Belisarius Call supporting the whole army. As I mentioned before, we have 2 Skitarii Ranger units and a Scorpius Dune Rider to help deliver the Sicarian Rust Stalkers, and then obviously get the battle line synergies from those Rangers as well. What an insane list. The Sidonian Dragoons kind of come out of nowhere, but the synergies with Halo Screed Battleclade are incredible for this weird unit. And with that, let's talk about the last, but certainly not least. It is, in fact, the meanest and the greenest army in the game for this week on Best Armies in 40k. Lucas Troller took down the Dicing Death with Orks and Orc Warhorde. And we've seen a lot of this stuff in the past, so none of this is going to be super surprising. We are bringing Ghazghkull Thraka alongside a big mech with Follow Me Lads to improve the speed of his unit. They can dual attach with Ghazghkull Thraka now, so the enhancement will benefit Gaz, and he can run up the table and do a bunch of damage. We have a War Boss as well as a Pain Boy that can attach into a second unit of boys to give them +1 to hit, and then obviously their Feel No Pain from the Pain Boss. We have a Beast Boss boss with a unit of Beast Snaga Boys to add some anti-monster, anti-vehicle, plus a standard mech and a bunch of utility. 3 units of Storm Boys for some deep strikers, 2 tank buster squads in order to add some anti-vehicle shooting, a battle wagon to carry some of these guys to the fight, in addition to aggression squad for backline objective holding and command point regen, plus some trucks in order to carry things like those tank busters around and give them somewhere to shoot their guns out of. Fairly standard stuff. It's nice to see a little bit of a more combined arms approach to orcs. We have been seeing a lot of these virile pressure orc lists that are running nothing but trucks and battle wagons and boys and stuff. But in this case, we're running a couple of those tank buster squads that are obviously always incredibly good to see. Obviously, the mainstay of these armies are these big boy squads that are going to be putting a lot of pressure on the opponent, trying to use that wog turn to get as much board presence as possible, obsec all those objectives, clear out the enemy in the midboard, and allow the more elite units to clean up in the late game. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon, at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Had a weird audio this week. My normal audio recording software has actually kind of pooped out on me, and we came back with really bad recordings. So I'm on a backup software. I don't think it sounds as good, but I don't know. Let me know down in the comment section. But also, remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.